Okay, Shalom Aleichem, good evening. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's topic, Thursday nights we do modern halacha, but since it's the days of the Omer, I wanted to base it on Pirkei Avot. So this class is talking about the almost crucially important lessons of Pirkei Avot and mixing it into modern halacha. We know that they asked Rabbi Ovadia Yosef a very interesting question, which is really if we look in Rabbi Ovadia's encyclopedic work, Yabia Omer, the question is like this: what is more important to have? A rabbi for a synagogue or a Hazan? Because Rabbi Ovadia is dealing here with the state of Israel. They have a rabbanut. They employ rabbis to make sure things are kosher. And they basically asked Rabbi Ovadia, the government didn't want to fund it appropriately. So Rabbi Ovadia is responding to how important it is that rabbis should be careful about the kosher, and especially it was the city of Yerushalayim. The city of Yerushalayim's Rabbanut, which is a government entity, today's Yom Ha'atzmaut, is very strong. That's why in Yerushalayim, Mahadrin, the glad kosher of the Jerusalem rabbinate, is very recommended. So Rabbi Ovadia responds about the crucial importance of how important it is to have a rabbi. And this leads us to Pirkei Avot. Now, why did I pick this subject? Yabia Omer. If you want to look at the where it is, it's Chelek Zayin Siman Chai 18. That's where they asked Rabbi Ovadia that is it appropriate for the government to defund the rabbinic people that are making sure the mikvaot and the kosher and all the rabbis that are taking care of the Jews of Jerusalem. So why did I pick this subject? Because let's look at Pirkei Avot. You know that between the holy day of Pesach and the holy day of Shavuot, the most vital day, glorious day of history where we got the 10 Commandments and the Torah, we have 6 Shabbats, right? So, and Pirkei Avot, ethics of our fathers, that teaches us how to be moral and ethical, has how many chapters? 6. So, in order that, a prerequisite to Torah is to be a decent derech eretz kadma Torah. To be a decent human being is what? A prerequisite for the Torah. So therefore, look what it says in Pirkei Avot. In Pirkei Avot, look at Perek Aleph, chapter 1, Mishnah 4. Look what the Mishnah says. Yossi ben Yochanan, Ish Yerushalayim. I'm sorry, Mishnah 4 is Yossi ben Yoezer, Ish Seradav, Yossi ben Yochanan, Yerushalayim kiblu mehem. Yehiyeh betcha bet vat chachamim. Your house should be a gathering place where the chachamim do jaleseh, when the chachamim do conduct meetings. Vehihaveh mitapek ba'afar raglehem. You should follow in their dust. You should always pursue and follow them. Vahaveh shoteh besamad divrehem. So you should always, with a very thirsty quench, you should always, their words should be so desirable to you. You should always be thirsty to hear their words, for them to quench your desire for learning. So that's the first Mishnah. So in the first chapter, that's one episode that it says a person should be very connected to what? The wise people. Then we go another Mishnah, 2 Mishnahs after this, in Mishnah 6, look what it says. It says, Yehoshua ben Perachia, Omer, Aseh lecha rav. You should make a rabbi, a mentor for yourself. In today's world, we're talking about life coaches. It's becoming one of the most popular professions. A lot of people, they have a life coach. But we didn't know that the secret to our success, we knew this thousands of years ago, that it's very important to have a mentor, somebody to coach you, to guide you. And it's very important to have a good friend. And then let's go another few Mishnayot. I'm just trying to illustrate how important this idea is to be connected to rabbis and have a personal mentor, a Chacham, a Rav. You go into Mishnah 15. Again, Rabban Gamliel mentions this. Rabban Gamliel omer aseh lecha rav istalek min hasafek. Make for yourself a rabbi, designate a rabbi to guide you so you won't always have questions. Because you know a big problem is a lot of people, they didn't grow up religious. Baruch Hashem, we have thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of people that have done teshuvah. But the people, they could be misguided. They're going to be strict in everything. See, when you don't know the halacha, and you fear God, you always want to be strict in anything. And this can cause some unpleasantness. Because in a scenario where it's the appropriate thing is to be lenient and you be super strict, it could cause a lot of hardship for your wife, children, parents, sisters, brothers. So it says, make a rabbi for yourself to know what's permitted and what's not permitted. So you shouldn't always have a question mark and and you fear God, so you want to go the hard way, but it's going to cause undesirable consequences of being always too machmir. So basically, in the first chapter of Pirkei Avot, we find 3 examples of how important it is to what? To have a meaningful relationship. And one of my good friends is here. This is actually one of the great, magnificent things that Chassidut did for the nation of Israel. And the people that are not Chassidim, they're really lacking that in the non-Chassidic world. Because one of the most important fundamental things of Chassidut is to have a Rebbe. So we see 3 examples in the first chapter of Pirkei Avot that it keeps on, emphasizing that, and they're very lucky Hasidim if they have a very meaningful relationship with a real Rebbe that's a true Sadiq and a true Chacham, a true wise person. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to realize that if the Mishnah gives us 3 different examples of this, it must be such an essential, important foundation of our relationship with God. So that's what brings me to this topic, that Rav Ovadia wants to deal, if the government wants to defund the rabbinate, is that appropriate? How important it is? Because in the elections, the coalition in this year, it was 1988, was trying to defund the office of the rabbinate of Jerusalem. So Rav Ovadia says that to bring a proof of how essential it is that there should be rabbis for the different congregations, it says that they asked Rabbeinu Asher, right? One of the 3 pillars of the Shulchan Aruch is the Rambam, the Rif, Alfasi, and the Rosh. So they asked the Rosh in Klal Vav, Siman Aleph, a fascinating question. They said a shul doesn't have a real budget, right? This is a problem. A lot of us, if you're Rosh Yeshiva or involved in any holy endeavor, Bet Midrash like we have here, Bet Knesset, you know that it's unfortunate, but a lot of times there's many programs and stuff we want to do, but there's no money, right? There's so many kollels and things that people can be built, but unfortunately it seems a lot of people would rather throw $500,000 weddings and drive Bentleys than support a bastion and a nuclear powerhouse of Torah. And this shul had the same problem. Their budget was very limited. So push comes to shove. They asked the Rabbeinu Asher a fascinating question. They said, Rabbi, we can only afford a rabbi or a Hazan. And you have to know, we take for granted. A lot of us, we come to Sunday school, which is really very, but people are lucky they go to Jewish school. We take it for granted. In the olden days, like the Rosh lived probably 700-800 years ago, a lot of people didn't know how to read Hebrew. When they came to the shul, they literally, most of the tefillah, in Iran it was like this. Most of the tefillah, they would follow who? The Hazan. The Hazan is a very quintessential important thing. It's not just for the voice. People didn't know how to daven. They only knew Shema. All the rest of davening, who would they follow? So fascinating question. Which one should they hire? Should they hire the rabbi or should they hire the Hazan? So look what the Rav Ovadia brings from the Rabbeinu Asher. He says that the Rosh says that if the rabbi is qualified and knowledgeable and he can answer, he could be Moreh Hora'ah, and Safek Shedalmud Torah Kodenem Letfilah. Because this is an idea we say every day in the beginning of our Siddur. Right? There's many mitzvot, like bringing peace amongst wife and husband, if a husband, or respecting your parents, right? This is, we said before the first Shema Yisrael, Elu Dvarim She'en Lam Shiur. But the Talmud Torah, Keneged Kulam, the quintessential and powerhouse and most powerful of all mitzvot is what? The study of Torah. So if they have a Hazan, which doesn't know any halacha, cannot guide the people, and he could just pray for them, push comes to shove. What's more important and vital? The Talmud Torah. But he says no. If, of course, they don't have a rabbi, of course they should hire, if the rabbi is not qualified, then of course they have to hire a Hazan because, and guess what? I never knew this, but in chapter 53 of the Shulchan Aruch, Maran, the Rabbi Yosef Karo brings this. It's in the Jewish code of law. He brings it down. If a shul could only afford because I told you, the Rabbeinu Asher is a very important pillar of Jewish halacha. So Maran quotes him in Shulchan Aruch, Nun Gimel, and he says, subcategory 24, Chaf Dalid, he says, push comes to shove, the rabbi takes precedence. They have to hire the rabbi. And they asked one of the great rabbis of Europe, the Ya'avetz, the son of the Chacham Svi, and he goes into a very, very beautiful thing. He says, Vadai Shadif Rab Moraha. He secondaries what the Rosh said. That of course, it's elementary that a rabbi is more important. If the rabbi has smicha and knows his halacha, even if he's not the Gadol Ador, right? Even if he's not a posek. Why? They love Kulal Madina Gemiri. A lot of people don't know halacha. The Kol HaKahal Misrael Muchrachim Liyot Laim Moreh Hora'ah. We need a mentor, right? See, our rabbis, and especially our chief rabbis, our Gedolim, our Poskim, they are like our shepherds, right? Can you imagine a flock of sheep? Right? What does the Zohar always call Moshe Rabbeinu? Ra'aya Mehemna. If a community is left without a rabbi, and this is where we have to give such tremendous praise and admiration for the Chabad rabbis, that they go and they're really many, many places in the world, the only connection the Jews there have is what? To a rabbi. And I wish other organizations would be so devoted and have such a Ahavat Yisrael, love of Jews. Because I had a congregant, may God give him a speedy recovery. He said such a beautiful mashal. He said, a synagogue, a community without a rabbi is like a hospital without a doctor. And it's true. I'm going to give you a few examples I had in my life where I saw this to the degree. Look what the Ya'avet says. He says, listen, you don't need a person that has a fancy schmancy voice. But if there's no leader, rabbinic leader, to teach people what's kosher, to teach people to go to mikveh, to build mikvaot, right? Terrible sins happen. And the Mishnah Berurah, the Chafetz Chaim talks about this, that it's incumbent upon every community and every synagogue to have a rabbi to teach him how to do the mitzvot of the Torah. Because everybody, we kiss the Torah, especially we Persian Jews have a tremendous affinity, right? But the Torah is, unfortunately, Chas v'Shalom, is a dead book if there's nobody what? Teach it and spread the light, right? The Torah is not going to be like a Google Voice to come, you give it thing and come read out for you. There's somebody that has to make it relevant, somebody that has to interpret it, somebody to give advice to people in their specific situation. And then he says, if God forbid the community doesn't have a shepherd, it's like they're going to be in darkness, right? Like we called our YouTube channel, and this synagogue is called Ma'or Torah. The Torah has a tremendous light. And I'm going to give you a few personal examples I had. I davened in a few shuls that didn't have a rabbi. And I could just give you very concrete, specific examples. So what the Chavetz Chaim says in Mishnah Brura is that a community without a rabbi is like in total darkness. Why? Sha'afilu im al yedei kach tiyeh mitzvah tefillah nidchet legamri. He says, even if, God forbid, the community will have nobody to pray for them, which I would imagine the rabbi would know how to daven also, but he says, even if there would be nobody to daven, if you don't daven, it's not karet, but if there's nobody to make a kosher mikveh, or to make sure that people eat kosher, or that people know how to keep Shabbat, right? What's much bigger sin? Tefillah is only midrabanan. He says, even if, look at the chiddush of the Mishnah Brura and Bir Halacha he brings, even if people won't daven altogether, it's still more important to have the rabbi. And then he goes into more talk about that the job of the rabbi is to make sure that there's kosher, right? Because, if you leave people to their own devices, a lot of questionable things could become kosher. Natan, you text me all the time about people, right? Yeah. When you have a rabbi, he's somebody that's knowledgeable because, money corrupts people. That's why the Gemara in the end of Kiddushin says that some shochtim and butchers, they're the partners of Amalek. Because, the Gemara says that in the end of Gemara Kiddushin, because if people are willing to sell people on kosher, and who's audit them, right? If there's a rabbi, the rabbi could audit. Like the Gemara in Chulin says, the rabbi has the privilege to always ask any shochet, show me your knife, show me your animal. Because think about it, you could make $1,000 on this animal. If it's on kosher, you could only sell it for a few, like maybe 100. So $900 difference. If the person's corrupt or he loves money more than God and people, he's going to give people one on kosher. So the rabbi is there to teach people shechita and all these things. And I'm just going to finish with the words of the Rambam. The Rambam in Hilchot Teshuvah, chapter 4, Halacha Bet. Look what the Rambam writes so eloquently. Shesiva ha'el yitbarach et Yeshaya navi l'chochatayim. What was the job of all the prophets of Israel, right? From Isaiah, Yeshaya to Jeremiah, Yirmiyah, Yecheskel. The job of all the prophets was, God clearly, if you read Nevi'im, God comes in a vision to all the prophets, Eliyahu, Elisha, and he tells them, listen, the Jews are going to Baal. The Jews are serving who? Idols. Go make sure the Jews are doing this mistake. The Jews are doing this mistake. So the prophet has a specific mandate to do what? To chastise and reproof and rebuff and reprimand the Jews, to guide them in the what? The way of Hashem. So it says, right? What is the job of the prophet? To reprimand and give musar, to guide the Jews to do what? Teshuvah. So nowadays, unfortunately, we don't have prophets. Lefichach, the Rambam says, Sarich la'amid bekol v'kal ve'edam yisel chacham gadol. Every community and every synagogue has to have a very big chacham. The Rambam is talking in our language, not Rav. Chacham gadol. Ve'yara shamayim mine'ura, from his youth he should have fear of heaven. Ve'ahuv lahem, and obviously he should speak their language, right? He should be able to communicate, and he should be beloved to them. Sheyu mochich lerabim u'machsiram b'teshuvah, so he can guide the people. Because guys, we human beings have a terrible habit, a horrible, harmful habit, a terrible tendency, and you know what that is? We always are lazy, and we get affected by the. Why do we in Kaddish a million times say Yitkadal vayatzmach purkaneh v'karev Mashiach? Why do we need Mashiach? Because when we're in Galut, we're in the mud. We're amongst Goyim. You go to a lot of Jewish weddings. I'm not joking. I officiated a wedding at the airport Hilton. When I got into the elevator, somebody told me, oh, he was a non-Jew. He said, Rab, you did a good job, but I'm not sure. Was this a Jewish wedding? He said, because from the way the people were dressed and the way they were dancing, I didn't see any kippahs. I And I felt terrible. I mean, I had officiated that wedding, but see, what happens is, especially, even if we're living in Israel, we human beings, when we make a mistake, we become complacent, right? That's the horrible habit. When you make a mistake 1, 2, 3 times, you become what? Used to it. And it's not only a mistake, some people even call their mistakes mitzvahs. Like I just had a case right now, just a few minutes ago. Somebody wants to get somebody to work on Shabbat, and the guy says, no, if he doesn't come and work on Shabbat, it's going to be, his life is in danger. Baloney shmaloni, right? So the job of the rabbi is when he sees that the people are copying the goyim, emulating the goyim, going to the path, becoming complacent with not having modesty, and all these other mistakes. You know, the Torah is a complicated book. It has a lot of details. To be a tzaddik is it easy? It's harder than becoming a millionaire, billionaire. It's harder than becoming a doctor, lawyer. To really, in such a society, especially we live in Los Angeles, to have a meaningful relationship. So there needs to be an auditor. I'm just a CPA also, so to talk in those terms. There needs to be an independent voice that's not scared of anybody. And they could see the pitfalls, right? The darkness, the dark alleys that the dark black holes that the people are falling in. What? Like the prophets, like Yeshaya and Eliyahu, that were fearless to tell them, hey, turn off your cell phone. You know, you're trying to connect with God. See, that's why the Chachamim, the Rav, if he's a real Chacham, he can make the Torah relevant. So the Rav Ovadia just brings it that you see from the Rambam is not saying it's like voluntary to have a rabbi. Bevadai shemilat sarich. The Rambam says it's required that every community should have a rabbi. Is that the poskim bring down that if the bet din of the greater area, if he sees a shul doesn't have a thing, the people could get sued. They could actually, like, the bet din of the larger area could force the people to hire a rabbi, because it's the horrible habit. When we people are left to our own devices, everything becomes mutar. So I want to tell you, when I was growing up in the San Fernando Valley, just to illustrate to you a few cases. You know, it's a big mitzvah in exactly a month, actually. From tonight, we're going to have to stay up the whole night. So I was davening in this Israeli shul, and I was so happy. I saw like a half a dozen teenage, like, people between the age of 22 to 13, 14 were all up. I was shocked. They said, yeah. This shul, by the way, did not have a rabbi. Later, they brought a rabbi, and there was a lot of politics. That's maybe a thing for another. I have to give a lecture, maybe write a book on being a rabbi is not easy. Even though the rabbi is an important job, but dealing with all different types of people is not easy. But so I was very happy. It was the first year I was in that shul. I saw, wow, there's a dozen. But then I saw something very, very heartbreaking. They started playing poker the whole night. So I was very young at the time. I must have been 15, 16 years old. I wasn't a rabbi. I was in yeshiva, but they had made such a ruckus that I was trying to start to learn the whole night. I was getting distracted constantly. You know, I was a young boy. I was 15, 16 years old, and there's no question in my mind that if there was a rabbi there, especially a younger rabbi, to learn with them, you know, that the night of Shavuot, which is such an auspicious and holy and special night, it's the night before that we accept the Torah, instead of playing poker the whole night and drinking beer, they would have, become enlightened and learned. And, constantly in this synagogue, I remember, on the first day of, we start saying Mashiva Ruach, right? On the first day, not on Simchat Torah, on Shemini Atzeret, we have to start saying what? So there was a gabbai there in the shul. He said, no, since we're outside of Israel, we have to start saying it from Simchat Torah. And I wasn't a rabbi, I was a young boy, I was 15, 16 years old, but there's, Rav Ovadia basically said in one of his classes, when there's no rabbi, everybody becomes the rabbi. And worse than that, the Satan becomes the rabbi. This is a phenomenon in a lot of shuls, in Sephardi shuls. There wasn't so many yeshivot, so it was hard to produce rabbis, even in Israel today. And there's always a conflict, because really that's what Pirkei Avot is saying. He says, have a very qualified and knowledgeable rabbi and don't have questions. Because you know especially how to pray, what haftarah to say, what to do, right? And then when there's no official rabbi, everybody wants to become the rabbi, and that causes a terrible, terrible amount of what? Chaos. So, I just wanted to tell you a fascinating, fascinating idea I heard from my Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Shmuel Yaakov Weinberg, Zichrono Lavracha. Just having him stay in my house in Los Angeles was such a blessing, and being close with him, seeing, you know, he said just a mesmerizing idea, and with this idea we're going to end. The Gemara in Brachot, Daf Vav Amud Bet, says that it's a good advice that a person should always live in the neighborhood of his rabbi. Le'olam hidor adam b'shchunat rabbo. Why? Because from the time that King Shlomo HaMelech, who was the wisest person of all time, right? We know Moshe is the greatest prophet of all time. But who's the wisest man of all time? Kohelet. That's what it says, right? Because when he took over the throne, Shlomo was very young. And God asked him, what did you want? He said, if you want money, I'll give you money. If you want power, I'll give you power. Then Shlomo HaMelech said, what? I want wisdom. And God said, I'll give you everything. I'll give you power. I'll give you... And so the most, it's brought down in Nevi'im, and in Chazal, in the words of our Chachamim, that the most intelligent man of all time, Chacham Mikol Adam, was who? Shlomo HaMelech. So the Gemara says, why is it always important to be in the sphere, in the neighborhood of your rabbi? Because Shlomo HaMelech made a terrible, terrible mistake. That the Navi, the prophet, says that it was Ke'ilu, that he committed adultery, idol worship. You know why? Idolatry. You know why? He married the queen of Sheba, the queen of the Paro's daughter. He had hundreds of wives, and these wives became corrupt. They didn't become proper Jews, and their children used to do idol worship in the palace of Shlomo. And since it was out of his control, and he wasn't serious enough about it, and he didn't stop them, like we said, the job of the rabbi is to what? Reprimand the people that are doing the wrong things, like the prophets did. Since he didn't do that, it's like in Navi, it's written that he committed, Shlomo HaMelech, it said committed idol worship. Of course Shlomo HaMelech didn't do that. He was a tzaddik, he wrote Mishlei, he wrote Kohelet, Shir HaShirim. But do you know when he started making these terrible mistakes of marrying all these non-Jewish women? After his rabbi passed away, Shimi Ben Gera. So the Rosh Yeshiva said such an eye-opening idea. He said, even if you're Shlomo HaMelech, having a rabbi is not necessarily, even if you're a super Einstein, Shlomo HaMelech genius, the idea of having a rabbi is an independent voice. Somebody, this week's parasha is Parashat Tazria Mesorah, right? You know one of the halachas is, if you have a leprosy, who has to solve your problem, Natan? We have two Kohanim here. The Kohen tells you if this is considered leprosy or not. Now let's say a Kohen himself gets the disease. Can a Kohen look for himself and declare? The halacha is a Kohen can't and you know what the reason for that is? Why? Because we people, we adore ourselves so much that of course we're always going to say for ourselves that what? If the Kohen is able to recognize and say that he's going to deceive himself and do what? Because the Mishnah says, "En adam ro'en atzmo." A person doesn't see his own deficiencies. You understand? So the idea of the Rosh Yeshiva is remarkable. He said, even Shlomo HaMelech, which was the wisest man of all time, he needs a Rebbe. And the fact of the matter is that from the time that his rabbi was alive, his mentor was alive, he never made the mistakes that he did, right? Once his rabbi he left his rabbi's neighborhood and his rabbi passed away to another world, he started making such terrible mistakes that God considered that he had did what? Idol worship, because he had married all these non-Jewish women, which he had converted, but they weren't obviously sincere, and their children, they still held on to their old traditions. And I'll just bring something, we'll end up with Kabbalah, because the days of the Omer have... The Chida brings down in his holy book, his commentary on Shulchan Aruch, Machzik Berachat, Halachot Shabbat, Siman Resh Tzadik, Ot Gimel. He says in the name of the Arizal, that the Maharchu, Rab Chaim Vital, which was the prize and most important student of the Arizal, right? The most important Kabbalist. He says the Arizal always used to tell the Maharchu, that he should always teach and give Torah lectures to teach people their mistakes and to do what? That they should do teshuvah. Even after the Arizal had passed away, he would come in dreams and remind the Maharchu that the main job of a rabbi is what? If you see people are not going to mikveh, if you see people are sending their kids to non-Jewish school, right? All the different mistakes that they make. Mixed dancing. Don't be afraid. Even after his mentor, the Arizal, had passed away, he would come into his dreams and tell the Maharchu, Rabbi Chaim Vital, that don't be afraid. Tell people they're like the prophets, right? And then he says, Uvazet taluha ge'ula. The Arizal, whether in life or after he passed away, he would always tell the Maharchu that this is, right? Uval et Sion goel ulshav bepesha, right? When does the Mashiach come to Sion? The Torah, the Nevi'im tells us, Uval et Sion goel ulshaveh bepesha bi'Yakov. When we do teshuvah, so what is, are people, like I told you, we have this horrible habit, this terrible tendency of being complacent, right? Are you going to be all the way randomly inspired to do teshuvah? Whose job is it to inspire people to do teshuvah, right? It's obviously the rabbi, the chacham's job. And the Arizal would say, Ve'el ketz l'secharo. The person that is able to bring people back to do teshuvah, there's no limit. It's unimaginable. The what? The reward that he gets from heaven. If you look at the Zohar just tells that there's like no limit. It's just like a nuclear, it's like winning the lottery. If you're a person that's fearless, and when you see people that are just going the wrong way, through love of God, you're able to bring them back to do teshuvah, your reward is just so enormous and immeasurable that it's fascinating. So, just to summarize, that today's lesson was about how important it is to have a relationship with a rabbi. And just like it's impossible, none of us could fathom not to be under the care of a